respects the user's freedom. Free software is ethical because it treats the users ethically, whereas proprietary software is simply morally wrong. Regardless of what it does when you run it, it's unethical because the social system of its distribution and use is unethical. But what specifically do I mean when I say respect the user's freedom? I better be more specific than that in order to make this a meaningful issue. Free software means the user has 4 essential freedoms. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program as you wish. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study the source code and change it to make it do what you wish. Freedom 2 is the freedom to help your neighbor. That's the freedom to distribute copies to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is the freedom to contribute to your community, which is the freedom to distribute copies of your modified versions when you wish. Now, both of these freedoms include commercial and non-commercial distribution. They include giving away copies and they include selling copies. So it's a mistake to think that free software is always gratis. It isn't necessarily gratis. That's not the issue. With all 4 freedoms put together, the user's freedom is respected, and thus the social system of distribution and use of the program is an ethical system. But if one of these essential freedoms is substantially missing, then the program is non-free software, proprietary software, which means that the social system of the program's distribution and use is unethical because it imposes an unjust power structure. A non-free program imposes the power of its developer on the users. And for this reason, developing non-free software is not a contribution to society. It's an attack on society. It's something that we shouldn't do. And as with any other social problem, we should try to correct it. So I see I actually started a tiny bit early according to my clock. With such rigid constraints, every second has to count. Anyway, I didn't know there was a clock. So, I now explain to you what we're in favor of and what we're against, but why? Why is it important for users to have these 4 freedoms? Freedom 2 is the freedom to help your neighbor, the freedom to distribute exact copies when you wish. This is important so that you can be a good ethical member of your community. Because if you use a program that doesn't give you freedom number 2, then you're in danger of falling into a moral dilemma at any moment whenever your friend says, "That program is nice, but I have a copy." At that point, what are you going to do? You will have fallen into a choice between 2 evils. One evil is to give your friend a copy and violate the license of the program. The other evil is to deny your friend a copy and comply with the license of the program. Once you're in this dilemma, you ought to choose the lesser evil, which is to give your friend a copy and violate the license of the program. This is the lesser evil because it's the one which falls on somebody who has done wrong to deserve it. You see, we can assume that your friend is a decent person and a good friend and normally deserves your cooperation. The reason we can assume this is not because it's the only possibility, but rather the other case is an easy one. If the person who asks you for a favor is nasty and never treats you right, you say, "Why should I spend my time helping you?" Get lost. So that case is easy. We're left with the other case, where it's a good friend, someone who does help you and other people and deserves your cooperation. By contrast, the developer of this proprietary program has deliberately attacked the social solidarity of your community. So if you've got to do wrong to one of them, do it to him. However, being the lesser evil does not mean it's good. Making an agreement and breaking it is never a good thing. Now, there are some agreements that are inherently evil, and keeping them is worse than breaking them. This is one example. But breaking them still is not good. And if you give your friend a copy, what will he have? He will have an unauthorized copy of a proprietary program. And that's a pretty bad thing. It's almost as bad as an authorized copy would be. So, once you have understood this dilemma, what you should really do is none of the above. And the way to do none of the above is make sure you're never in the dilemma. There are two ways to do that. One is, don't have any friends. That is the method implicitly recommended by the proprietary software developers. The other is, don't use proprietary software. Reject it. Treat it as evil, and don't become a user of it. If you don't use the Nonfree program, you don't have to face the question of what you would do if your friend asks for a copy of it. If you do as I do and accept only free software, then whenever someone asks you for a copy, you can legally distribute a copy. You don't face a moral dilemma. That is the way to be ethical. That's the way to avoid doing any wrong. The most important resource of any society is not a physical resource. It's a psychosocial resource. It's the spirit of goodwill, the spirit of aiding your neighbor. It's no accident that people who have tried to be ethical leaders in humanity for thousands of years have encouraged this spirit of goodwill, because they realized that if they could convince people to increase their level of goodwill even a little bit, it makes life better for everyone. So what does it mean when powerful social institutions say that it's wrong to share? What are they doing? They are poisoning this vital resource, something that no society can afford. And what does it mean when they say if you share with your neighbor, you're a pirate? What are they saying? They're trying to equate helping your neighbor with attacking a ship. Nothing could be more false than that, because attacking ships is generally very bad, but helping your neighbor is admirable. And what does it mean when they impose harsh punishments like years in prison or being sued for millions of dollars on people who share with their neighbor? How much fear is it going to take before your friends are too scared to share with you, or before you are too scared to share with them? What they're doing is a terror campaign, and we need to stop it. Sharing with your neighbor is good, and trying to stop people from sharing is evil. So that's the reason for freedom number 2. The freedom to help your neighbor, the freedom to distribute exact copies. Freedom 0 is essential for other reasons. So you can have control of your computing. Believe it or not, there are proprietary programs that even restrict the running of an authorized copy. And those, they restrict who can run it, or on which computer, or how much, or when, or for what purpose. That's obviously not having control of your computing. So freedom 0 is essential, but it's not enough, because freedom 0 is just the freedom to do or not do whatever the program is already programmed to do. So the developer still controls you, but instead of doing so through a restrictive license, he does so through the code of the program, deciding what the code of the program will do for you and what it won't. So in order to have control, you also need freedom 1, which is the freedom to study the source code and change it to make the program do what you wish. This way you decide and not the developer. Many non-free programs that don't give you freedom number 1 include malicious features designed to spy on you, restrict you, even attack you. For instance, when the user of Windows, and I won't say you because I'm sure you wouldn't use such a lousy thing. When the user of Windows uses the menu feature to search for a word in her own files, Windows sends a message saying what word was searched for. That's one spy feature, but there's another. When Windows XP asks for an upgrade, it sends a list of all the programs installed on the machine. Another spy feature. Now, Microsoft didn't announce these spy features. They were discovered by investigation, which means there might be others people haven't found yet. There's no way to be sure, but lots of other proprietary programs spy on the user. For instance, Windows Media Player reports whatever the user looks at, and so does Real Player, and probably a bunch of others. Spyware is quite common, but it gets worse. There's also the malicious features designed to restrict the user. In other words, the functionality of refusing to function. Where the program says, I don't want to let you see this file, even though it's on your computer. I don't want to let you copy part of this file, even though it's on your computer. I don't want to print this file for you, because I don't like you. Every one of these features essentially is your computer saying, I don't serve you, I serve someone else, and he wants me to keep the chains on you. These features are also known as Digital Restrictions Management, or DRM, the intentional malicious feature of refusing to function for you. Now, this is becoming so widespread and so vicious that we have a special campaign against it that you can find in defectivebydesign.org. The iPod implements DRM. Windows implements DRM. Google Earth implements DRM. The BBC distributes a player that implements DRM. DVDs are designed for DRM. There is a free program, a free software package that can get around that restriction. And because of that, it's censored in this country. The United States doesn't respect freedoms very much at all anyway, and one example is the censorship of software. So if you buy a DVD, nominally speaking, you have still the right to play it in the US. But the free software that you could use to play it is forbidden to distribute. You will find people who have copies, however. And really, that's the only ethical way you could get and watch a DVD. You should never get products that are afflicted with digital restrictions management because they're designed to be your enemies. So, and you should not give success to those campaigns to attack our freedom. So you should never buy a product with DRM unless you possess the means to break the DRM. So if you have free software to read the DVD, then it's okay to get a DVD. Otherwise you shouldn't. Now, I've chosen not to get DVDs. I'd rather do that than actually have a copy of the program. And the reason is that I go to countries such as France where even possessing a copy of that program is a crime. And I'd rather not provide an excuse to the movements to the enemies of our freedom. to arrest me for that. And I don't like the Hollywood movie companies very much. I'm perfectly happy not to give them any of my money. But it gets even worse. There's also the kind of malicious feature that's designed to attack the user, backdoors. Now, one proprietary program you might have heard of that has a backdoor is Microsoft Windows. You see, when Windows XP asks for an upgrade, Microsoft knows more or less the user's identity, and therefore can provide to that user an upgrade designed specifically for him. Meaning, Microsoft can basically take control of his machine and do whatever the hell it wants. Windows Vista is designed to make all these things worse. That's its purpose. It has nastier digital restrictions management. It refuses to operate certain hardware devices and makes the users throw them away and buy new ones because those devices weren't designed to restrict the user enough. That's what Windows Vista is for, is restricting the user more. And one thing it does, you see, with Windows XP, at least you've got the option of saying no to an upgrade. But Windows Vista takes away that option. It allows Windows to force an upgrade. So Microsoft can always take control of the user's computer. It's worse than just a backdoor. It's like basically having a cable coming from Microsoft going into your head and controlling it. Windows Vista is such a bad thing that we've set up an explicit campaign, a specific campaign called badvista.org to urge people not to upgrade to Windows Vista. Now, of course, you shouldn't be running Windows at all if you want freedom. Every version of Windows is proprietary software. Every version takes away your freedom. But Windows Vista takes it away much worse. They're pulling the chains tighter. So if you're not ready to defenestrate your computer just yet, which means either throw Windows out of the computer or throw the computer out the window, then at least don't take a further step under Microsoft's power. That's the reason for badvista.org. So, however, the same practice, forcing upgrades, is implemented in Mac OS. Microsoft is not the only evil software developer. Everyone making non-free software is treating the users unjustly. Now, by maintaining power that they shouldn't have. Now, some of the, just as 160 years ago, there were some masters that treated their slaves more nicely and some who were crueler. But the point is, nobody should be our master. So, yes, you can find that some of these software developers exercise their power more cruelly and harshly, and some are a little bit considerate. But the point is, nobody should have that kind of power over anybody else. And in order to put an end to that, we need free software. Now, I've explained the need for freedom, number one, so you can get rid of malicious features and also add the desirable features you want. But Freedom 1 is not enough to do this, and the reason is that's the freedom to personally study and change the source code. And that's not enough because there are millions of users that don't know how to program. So they are not personally capable of taking advantage of exercising this freedom. But even for a programmer like me, Freedom 1 is not enough, and the reason is there's just too much software. There's too much free software today for any one person to master it all and personally make all the changes she might want. So the only way we can really have control of our computing is if we can work together. For that, we need Freedom 3, the freedom to distribute copies of our modified versions, the freedom to contribute to our community. With this freedom, people can work together to make the changes they want, and they don't even have to prearrange it. Suppose there are a lot of people who want changes in a certain free program going in this direction. Well, somebody will make a change that goes part of the way and publish his modified version. And people will say, that's better. So then they'll switch to it, and then someone else maybe will make another change going further and publish that modified version. So people will switch to that, and then someone else will make another change. And so step by step, with contributions from various people, we'll get pressure and we'll get progress in this direction, because a lot of people want progress in this direction, and a lot of people contribute to it. Whereas if only a few people want progress in this direction, they can still do it, and if they're really enthusiastic, they can still make good progress. But on the average, we expect progress to be slower because fewer people want to do it. And if nobody wants progress in this direction, it can't happen. Nobody will make changes in this direction, except somebody, perhaps somebody malicious might do it. So somebody malicious might make a change in this direction and publish his modified version, and people will see it's nasty and they won't use it, and that's that. Because with free software, nobody has the power to impose anything on anybody else. Nobody has the power to put in a certain misfeature and say, now you're going to have to suffer with this misfeature, because anybody else can take it out, and everyone is free to take it out. So the result is nobody has power over anybody. We're all free to do what we individually want, and also free to work together. Of course, it doesn't take long to see that working together is very useful, and it's a good way to get what you want. So in our community, we have lots of working together. But it's voluntary, totally unconscripted. It's voluntary cooperation producing a massive amount of order without force. And the combined result of these four freedoms is democracy. You see, a free program develops democratically under the control of its users. Each user individually has control of her copy. But meanwhile, together, all of us participate as much as we choose to in the larger social decision of which way the program is going to go. It's not classical electoral democracy. We don't have an election in which everybody gets one vote and that decides what the program is going to do, because we're all free to make the program do this or that or the other thing, whichever we like. But users often prefer to be using the same version as other people. Interoperability is quite useful. Compatibility is quite useful. And with free software, the users get what they want. So when they want compatibility, they get compatibility. Sure, if somebody wants to make an incompatible version, he can. He's not forbidden. But if most users want compatibility, they won't use his incompatible version. It'll fail at the level of society as a whole. It's not forbidden. He and a few friends can go on using it if they like. Perhaps in 10 years, everyone will decide that his version is what they want, and then they can use it. But as long as people keep preferring the compatible common version, they'll keep using that. So when users want compatibility, they get it. By contrast, in proprietary software, we're all familiar with stories of developers that choose to make their programs incompatible because they have the power to do it. They have the power to impose incompatibility on their users. And they can do this because the users don't have freedom. The users don't have control because it's not free software. The reason incompatibility can be imposed on users, just like the reason why spying or digital restrictions management can be imposed on users is that the users aren't free in the first place. A proprietary program develops under the dictatorship of its developer and carries that power along with it and imposes that power on the program's users. If you want to be free, you have to escape from proprietary software. And that is the purpose of the free software movement. We're not just saying that freedom is better than being under somebody's dominion. We're doing something about it. We have developed a complete free operating system, the GNU system, which works together with Linux, the kernel. And using this system, you can get rid of proprietary operating systems such as Windows or Mac OS or Palm OS or any other proprietary operating system it might be. You can erase them. And that's the point, because in order to be free, you have to erase them. You can't have freedom while using a non-free program. That's what makes those programs non-free, is that they are trampling the freedoms you should have. To escape from their power, you escape from running them. And our goal is to make that as easy as possible by developing the free software for you to escape to. When the United States was established as a free country, it took a war in which a lot of people died. People had to sacrifice their lives to establish freedom in this country. Fortunately, establishing freedom inside our computers is much, much easier. And although in the 24 years or so, some developers have died, of course, with so many people, more than 1 million. Of course, a few of them will die, but basically they didn't sacrifice they weren't killed. So nobody had to sacrifice his life in that sense. In fact, even suffering tremendous hardship is not necessary. But it did, at the beginning, require a lot of work. You see, in 1983, when I started this movement, there was no way to run a computer and have freedom, because the computer won't do anything without an OS, and all the OSs were proprietary. So the only way to run a computer in freedom was by doing a big job of software development. It was necessary to write a free operating system. So that's what I decided to do. In September 1983, I announced the plan to develop the GNU operating system. GNU is a recursive acronym. It stands for GNU's Not Unix. And aside from being amusing, it indicates that GNU is a Unix-like operating system, so technically speaking, it's similar. And the name thus gives credit to Unix for those ideas that we imitated. But also, most importantly, although GNU is compatible with Unix, GNU is not Unix. And that's absolutely essential, because Unix was and is proprietary software. But GNU was going to be free software. That was the whole purpose of writing it. Where other operating systems have been developed either for technical purposes or for commercial purposes, the GNU operating system was developed for an ethical purpose, for the sake of our freedom and community. So it was necessary to replace absolutely all of Unix, because we couldn't use any of it. And that's what we did, piece by piece by piece by piece. In 1992, we had almost all the pieces, but one major piece, the kernel, was still missing. The kernel is the program that allocates the machine's resources to all the programs you run. And in that year, Linux, a recently developed kernel, was made free software. When Linux was first released for testing in '91, it had a different license that made it non-free. I believe that license prohibited commercial distribution. And since free software means that all kinds of users can have freedom, and that includes users when they're doing business activities, not just users in their hobbies or their education. And it includes companies as well as individuals. So a program that doesn't allow commercial distribution doesn't qualify as free. So Linux was relicensed in 1992 to use the GNU General Public License. That's the free software license I had written to release the various components of the GNU system. Today, the GNU General Public License is the most popular, that is the most widely used free software license. Around 70% of free software packages are licensed under the GNU GPL. That means 30% or so are licensed under other licenses. There are other free software licenses. The main difference between the GNU GPL and most free software licenses is the GNU GPL is a copyleft license. Now, in order to qualify as a free software license, the license has to give you the 4 freedoms. That's what it means to be a free software license. It makes the program free software. If you have a copy, the license says you've got these 4 freedoms, so it's free software. The difference between the copyleft in the GNU GPL and most free software licenses is the GNU GPL says whenever you redistribute it, either unmodified or modified, you have to keep the license the same, so that the person who gets it from you gets the same freedoms that you got from us. And then when he redistributes it to someone else, she gets the same freedoms from him. And so everyone who gets the software gets the freedoms also. In effect, copyleft makes the 4 freedoms into inalienable rights for all users. Users that all users are assured of having. And the way we do this is we forbid middlemen to take them away. If a middleman could get a copy of the program and modify it, and then release his modified version under a different license that restricted people, then they would get a version of our program, but they would not get freedom. And that would defeat the goal, which is to give people freedom. The whole point of developing this software is to give everybody freedom. So I designed a license that would make sure it couldn't go wrong by turning the software into proprietary software. The middlemen can't do that. That's the idea of copyleft. But there are other free software licenses which do permit proprietary versions, but nonetheless the developer has respected your freedom. He hasn't taken it away. And if you get the developer's version, or some other version that is under the same license, it is free software. So the non-copyleft free software licenses are not unethical. They respect your freedom, but they fail to actively defend your freedom against middlemen. Copyleft licenses respect your freedom and defend it. I think it's better to do that, because freedom is very weak and very precarious these days. And we need to do more than merely refrain from doing any evil. We've got to try to organize to defend freedom. In any case, once Linux became free software, the combination of GNU and Linux made a complete free operating system, which was basically the GNU system plus Linux. And people got confused and they started calling the whole thing Linux. And that's why you'll find magazines and newspaper articles and websites that are talking about Linux, and really they mean the GNU system. It's quite unfair to us. And so I hope you will not go along with that unfair practice. If you're talking about the operating system, the whole thing, the kind of something you could install in a computer and actually use it, that's not just Linux. Linux alone wouldn't run by itself. you're talking about the GNU system plus Linux. So please call it GNU/Linux or GNU plus Linux. And that will also help educate people so that they'll realize what part of this thing actually is Linux. You will find lots of articles that are totally incomprehensible because sometimes they say Linux and they mean Linux. And sometimes they say Linux and they mean the GNU system with Linux, the GNU plus Linux system. But they say Linux in both places, and the reader can't tell that they're mixing up two different things. And unless you're an expert already, you can't figure out what that article actually is talking about. So they're spreading grave confusion, and the only way to avoid it is use two different names for these two different things. If you're talking about the kernel, that's Linux. If you're talking about the whole system, that's GNU plus Linux. If you take care to distinguish, then at least in your writing, people will be able to understand what you're talking about. It'll also help you be sensitive to when articles you're reading have failed to explain the situation clearly. If you're reading an article and it says Linux and you don't know whether it really means Linux or GNU/Linux, that means the article is confused and you need to check the facts if you want to know what's really going on. The article failed to tell you. You'll discover that that's quite common. So one reason you should do this is to give us credit for our work. And I think we deserve it. We started this project, we did the biggest part of the software development, and the vision for this was ours. So I think we deserve at least equal mention. But there's something more important at stake here than just credit. Because ego is not the most important ethical issue. There's a much more important issue at stake here, and that is your freedom. Because freedom is frequently threatened. So in order to keep your freedom, you have to be prepared to defend it. If you look at AmericanFreedomCampaign.org, you'll see how terribly our freedom has been attacked in the past 6 years. It's almost destroyed. And the reason is that we Americans got distracted. You know, they said, oh, look, there are these terrorists who are going to blow you up. And we said, oh no, I'm terribly scared, take away my freedom, protect me. So we forgot to defend our freedom, and we've lost vital human rights that the U.S. government officially doesn't recognize. And that can happen in any area of life, so in every area of life we have to be prepared to recognize and defend our freedom. Well, the more traditional kinds of freedoms, such as freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom not to be imprisoned without trial, freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures. There have been centuries to spread the ideas of these freedoms around the world. That didn't save the U.S. We've had these freedoms more or less taken away. But at least with lots of people around the world knowing about these freedoms, that provides a base to try to defend them. But using computers is fairly new in society. And it's only about 15 years in the U.S. since most people used computers at all. And that hasn't been much time to think about questions of what human rights the user of software is entitled to. I think I've identified 4 of them, the 4 essential freedoms that define free software. These are freedoms you should always have when you're using software. But these ideas of the free software movement have hardly been heard by our society. Even most of the people promoting the use of the GNU plus Linux system don't talk about these ideas. And to make sure that they never come up, those people don't even say free software. They say open source. That term was publicized in 1998 as a way of completely burying all the ideas associated with the term free software, making sure that they would never come up again. So they were able to start their own discourse associated with the term open source, starting from zero, and they chose never to present it as a question of freedom for the user. They chose never to criticize proprietary software as unethical. All they do is talk about a development model of collaborative development and the practical advantages that they say typically result from it. Well, that's an interesting subject to look at if you're about to start a development project. It's worth studying the different development models and picking one that will work well for you. So their work, the open source people's work, is good for something. But because it fails to teach people to think about freedom, it doesn't help us defend our freedom. And wouldn't you know it, the big companies mostly started talking about open source because they didn't want people to think about freedom. Those companies, even if they contributed sometimes to free software, also have proprietary software products. They don't want people to learn to recognize in a proprietary software product something that's going to put chains on them, something that's unjust, something that threatens the social solidarity of their society, and something that they should reject on principle. So these companies promote open source, and they promote the apolitical ideas associated with open source, and they don't mention these ideas of freedom. And most of our community went along. It's open source rocks fewer boats. It doesn't raise the deeper issues that can make people uncomfortable. So, in that sense, it spreads more easily. And when it spreads, it does some good, but it doesn't teach people to defend their freedom, and that's what we need most. Because in recent years, there have been laws prohibiting free software, and there are plans for more. It's illegal in the US to distribute a wireless card where the firmware is free software. In fact, the only wireless cards that you can actually use without installing proprietary software on your computer are a few where they have a circuit and no firmware, and others where the firmware is in a ROM in the thing and can't be, and nobody can install it. Software in a ROM is pretty much equivalent to a circuit. So most wireless cards don't work with free software. It's a problem that we've had for several years, and that we are continuing to try to do something about slowly as we get a chance. And another problem is the prohibition on free software to access things like DVDs. And then, of course, with the high-density media, it's even worse. They have a much more clever digital restrictions management system. And people broke it anyway and started posting the key on a website, and the website got threats and they took it down, and it was posted again. Eventually, when it had been posted 100,000 times, they said, all right, we give up, we'll just have to see if they sue us. And eventually, I believe it was something like 700,000 different web pages posting that key. Well, that was good for showing people's resistance to digital restrictions management and the evil laws that are meant to back it up. Those laws simply have the purpose of reinforcing Hollywood's power over us. Governments like the U.S. government that pass such laws have taken the side of Hollywood and other large companies against their citizens. Well, of course, that's what the U.S. government does all the time, but this is a very clear and thus a case that clearly shows what it is that we're fighting. This is another reason why I recommend that you shouldn't ever pay to see a movie unless you have specific reasons to believe that movie is good. The effect is almost the same as a total boycott of Hollywood. Anyway, I'd like to mention a couple of secondary topics to close. One is free software and employment. Some people trying to sabotage the free software movement spread ridiculous rumors such as that if the world migrates to free software, then no programmers will be able to eat. That's ridiculous. There are lots of other jobs in the world, but even the idea that programming employment will go away is false. That's based on a simple mistake, which I'll now explain. Let's look at the IT sector. The IT sector is a substantial amount of work. And actually, if you can, if you're programming and you did some other IT sector job, it would be okay. But programming is actually just a small fraction of the IT sector. But now let's look at the programming. Developing proprietary software products is a small fraction of that. I've heard figures like 10 to 15%. So almost all paid programming work is not development of proprietary software, it's development of custom software. Software for one particular client. Now, in a world where all software is free, how does that affect the custom software industry? It doesn't change anything. If a certain business wants a program developed this year to do a certain job, it's going to have to pay. Sure, they could say, let's wait and see if a volunteer shows up. But people typically volunteer for worthy causes, not just for a business. So that business, unless it's very foolish, is going to hire somebody, the same as it does now. So the worst that could happen is that we lose a small fraction of the IT sector employment, which means basically nothing to worry about at all. However, that doesn't mean free software would reduce programming employment. It might increase programming employment because free software generates other jobs. Jobs of adapting and extending free software to do the job some client wants done. If a client of a business is considering using a proprietary program, it has two choices, take it or leave it, because they can't change it. But if the program is free software, they've got lots of choices. They could use it as is, they could reject it, they could use it with this change, or this change, or this change, or this change. Thousands of different conceivable changes they might find worth the cost of making. Just as when a business moves into office space, they typically rebuild it to be convenient for the business they're going to do. And there's a lot of employment in this rebuilding activity. I was told it was more than the construction of new buildings. So we might lose a little bit of the IT sector employment, or we might have a net gain. I'm not an economist, I won't try to say which. The main point, the crucial point is just there's nothing to worry about. Second, free software and education. Schools must teach only the use of free software. There are 4 reasons for this. One is to save money, and that's an important factor because even in the richest countries, the schools don't have enough money. I guess that's because of the politicians are too right-wing. So they have no business wasting their money paying for permission to run proprietary software. Since this is superficial, it's obvious, and some proprietary software companies eliminate this reason by donating gratis copies of their non-free software to schools. And why do they do that? Is it because they want to promote education idealistically? I don't think so. No, it's because they want to turn these schools into instruments to impose on the students a permanent dependency on that proprietary software. It's as if they were handing out free samples, gratis samples of drugs to inject into the students so that they'll graduate with a dependency. They want to make the students into addicts of that software so that after they graduate with this dependency, then they'll find that the company doesn't offer them gratis copies anymore, and especially not to the companies where they go to work after they graduate. Those companies are not going to be offering gratis copies either. So essentially, these companies are buying the help of the school to impose this dependency on all of society. Well, that is very wrong. Schools should not do this. Just as they would not accept, say, free samples of heroin to inject into the students, they shouldn't accept free samples of Windows. They shouldn't turn their students into Windows addicts, because the copy may be gratis, but it's not free software. And there's a deeper reason, which is so that good natural-born programmers can develop their skills. Because for a natural-born programmer, you don't have to be taught to program. That's obvious. You read a manual, you see what it means to program, and you think, wow, I want to do that. But to learn to program well is something else. The way you learn to write good, clear code is by reading lots of code and writing lots of code. You have to read lots of code so that you come across lots of things that are hard to understand. And when each time you see something that's hard to understand, you learn, I shouldn't do it that way. Free software makes this possible. Proprietary software does not make this possible. And as a beginner, as a very talented beginner, how do you write lots of code? The best way is take an existing large program, for instance, a system program that you use, and add a feature to it. And then show your implementation to somebody else and say, could you critique my feature? Well, this program may be, say, 500,000 lines of code, but your new feature might only be 1,000 lines. So, because you're a brilliant beginner, you're not ready to write a 500,000 line program, but you could write a 1,000-line new feature. And then you can get critiques from people who are more experienced, and they can show you how to write it well, cleanly, reliably, maintainably, how to follow the style of the program it's in, and all the other things that make the difference between just doing it somehow and doing it well. So you do that over and over again, and in a few years, you're a really good programmer. Every school can offer this opportunity, but only through free software. However, there's an even deeper reason, and that is for the sake of ethical education, education and citizenship. Every school at every level has to be teaching not just facts and not just skills, but above all, the spirit of goodwill, the spirit of helping your neighbor. So, every class has to have a rule. Students, if you bring software to class, you may not keep it for yourself. You must share it with the rest of the class. Which means every class has to have a rule. Proprietary software is not allowed here. This is a place for transmitting and sharing human knowledge. If you bring software to school, it must be free software. And every school at every level must do its education using exclusively free software. This university must migrate to free software, and it is your responsibility to make that happen. In a few years, it can be done. It can't be done overnight, but it can be done in a few years as long as they take substantial steps and make real progress every year. Other schools have done this and are doing it. It can be done here too. And every school must do it. There is no excuse for teaching the dependency on proprietary software. because schools have a social mission. Their mission is to train the next generation to be citizens of a strong, independent, and free society. And to the extent that this involves using computers, that means teaching them to be free software users. Thank you.